You're on a channel dedicated to sci-fi horror, creepy, mysterious, and thrilling stories. Today, we have a book from horrorstories.app, a platform filled with terrifying and awesome sci-fi tales. Check out the link in the description. There's plenty to read and listen to. Now get comfortable. Here's a story that won't let you sleep.
The Gideon descended through the thin atmosphere of the alien world, its hull glowing faintly with the friction of entry. The planet's surface stretched beneath them like a fractured mirror, jagged and desolate. Dr. Elena Vasquez gripped the armrests of her seat in the small observation deck, her trained eyes scanning the glass plains below. Sunlight, weak and watery, glinted off the black, glass-like rock, creating an unsettling refraction of light that shifted and rippled eerily as the ship passed overhead, almost as if watching.
"Final approach in 30 seconds,
announced Captain Aaron Malick from the cockpit, his deep voice steady but clipped.
Brace for touchdown."
Elena leaned forward, her data tablet flickering with streams of information. The faint energy readings she had been monitoring since their descent spiked again, erratic but unmistakable, like fireflies winking in and out of existence. Activity under the surface, she thought, her brow furrowed. It couldn't be purely geological. The ship shuddered as it settled onto its landing gear, the metallic groan of weight meeting the unstable ground reverberating through the cabin. Elena rose instantly, her practicality overriding the faint queasiness in her stomach. Around her, the rest of the crew prepared to disembark.
"All right."
Malick began, stepping into the main chamber where the team had gathered. His presence immediately commanded attention, his shoulders squared, his tone sharp.
"Standard protocol. Nobody ventures more than 100 meters from the ship without reporting back. Dr. Vasquez, get your scans. Park, prioritize repairing our atmospheric stabilizers. Carter, you're on perimeter security. Hargrove."
Malick's gaze lingered briefly on the lanky biologist, his jaw tightening.
"Stick with Vasquez. We don't need anyone wandering off."
Neil Hargrove gave a faint, non-committal nod, his expression as unreadable as ever. Elena caught the slight edge in Malick's voice but chose not to comment. Instead, she busied herself with securing the wrist strap on her tablet, her fingers brushing the small patch of Chile's flag on her jumpsuit, a grounding gesture she hardly noticed herself doing anymore. The airlock hissed open, and the crew stepped onto the surface of this unknown world. The weight of the planet's slightly heavier gravity pressed on them, a subtle reminder that they were far from home. Elena knelt immediately, scraping a small sample of the glittering black rock into a containment vial.
"Volcanic glass, but the composition is strange. Metallic infusions, maybe. It's almost conductive."
She turned the rock in her gloved hand, the microscopic veins glinting faintly under the dim sunlight. Nearby, Neil crouched over a patch of the shimmering plants clustered on the glass-like ground, their chitinous leaves shifting imperceptibly.
"These are reactive,"
he said, his voice calm but charged with fascination. He reached out to touch one with a gloved finger. The leaf twitched in response, curling slightly before returning to its original position, as though testing him back.
"Not quite plant, not quite animal,"
Neil continued, seemingly speaking more to himself than anyone else.
"The membrane structure, adaptive, remarkable."
"Don't get too close. We don't know how these interact with organic material, or if they're toxic."
Elena warned, her tone sharp, but her attention was still split between her scanner and the faint vibrations underfoot. Neil smirked faintly, the expression barely reaching his eyes.
"Toxicity is an afterthought for discovery, isn't it?"
Elena glanced at him sharply, her jaw tightening, but she held her tongue. The glass plains stretched endlessly around them, a fractured expanse shimmering faintly in the watery light. Geysers erupted in the distance, sending ghostly clouds of phosphorescent mist into the air that hung briefly before dissipating. The hum beneath their feet was so faint it could almost be dismissed, except it wasn't constant. It pulsed, a rhythmic vibration that Elena couldn't quite shake, like something enormous stirring below.
Anything unusual?
Malik's voice broke her concentration as he approached, his shadow falling across her scanner.
Define unusual.
Elena replied, her professionalism softening into a flicker of sarcasm. She brushed a strand of curly black hair from her forehead, her gaze fixed on the data streaming across her tablet.
The ground's humming, the plants are twitching, and the energy readings are spiking. Take your pick.
Malik folded his arms, his expression unreadable but tense.
Could be geothermal doesn't mean it's alive.
Geothermal doesn't grow plants like these. This planet isn't as dormant as it looks.
Elena countered, her gaze flicking to the patch Neil was still examining. Her voice lowered just slightly. The captain gave a curt nod but said nothing, his gaze sweeping the horizon.
Park status?
Malik called, turning his attention to the petite engineer crouched by the ship's landing gear. Jenna Park's mechanical arm gleamed faintly as she worked, its precision movements a stark contrast to her sweat-streaked face.
Stabilizer took a nasty hit during entry.
Jenna replied without looking up.
Should be functional in an hour, maybe less if I can jury-rig a workaround.
Make it 30 minutes.
Malik ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Jenna muttered something under her breath, her human hand tightening briefly on her wrench. She didn't look up as she returned to her task, but her movements became sharper, more deliberate. The faint tension in the air was broken by Tom Carter's voice, his casual drawl carrying a note of forced levity. Elena straightened and turned to see the pilot pointing at the same cluster Neil had been studying. The chitinous leaves appeared to shift slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make her chest tighten. Neil scoffed.
It's just an optical illusion. Wind patterns.
There is no wind.
Tom replied, the grin fading from his face. Elena stepped closer, her scanner emitting a faint, erratic beep as she ran it over the plants. The readings were strange, fragmented, as though the device couldn't fully process what it was detecting.
They're integrated. These aren't just plants, they're part of something larger. A network?
Enough.
Malik interrupted sharply, his voice cutting through the growing unease.
We'll analyze samples back on the ship. For now, gather what you need and let's move. I don't want us out here after dark.
The crew worked in tense silence, the oppressive atmosphere pressing heavier with each passing moment. As the pale sun dipped toward the horizon, the first geyser erupted closer, its phosphorescent mist coating the ground, and the team in a faint, glowing residue. Tom brushed at his arm, frowning.
What the hell is this stuff?
Elena held up her scanner, squinting at the readings.
Non-toxic, as far as I can tell,
she said, but there was a tightness in her tone, and the faint metallic tang of the air seemed stronger now, clinging to the back of her throat. As they regrouped near the ship, the first auditory disturbance came. It was faint, almost inaudible, a fragment of a voice, distorted and distant.
Did anyone else hear that?
Jenna asked suddenly, her voice trembling. She glanced around, her hands clenching at her sides.
Hear what?
Neil replied, his tone detached, his posture unnervingly still.
Voices, like us, but not.
Jenna's words came out in a rush, her wide eyes darting to the shadows stretching across the plains. Elena exchanged a glance with Malik, her unease mirrored in his furrowed brow.
It's the environment.
Malik said firmly, though his voice carried a slight edge now.
It's playing tricks on us. Stay focused.
But as the rhythmic pulses beneath the fissures grew louder, even he couldn't fully mask the flicker of apprehension in his eyes. That night, Elena lay awake in her bunk, staring at the metallic ceiling of the ship. The whispers had grown more frequent, faint but insistent, threading through the hull like ghostly echoes. The vibrations underfoot had synced disturbingly with her own heartbeat, a low, relentless rhythm she couldn't block out. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breaths, but sleep wouldn't come. Outside, The glass planes were eerily still, shrouded in shadows save for the occasional eruption of mist. Then the tremor hit. The ship lurched, the metallic groan of its frame ringing through the cabin. Elena scrambled from her bunk, grabbing her data tablet as the lights flickered. Her pulse pounded as she raced to the observation deck. The fissures outside glowed faintly now, a rhythmic, pulsing light that seemed almost alive.
Captain,
She whispered, her voice tight with fear as Malik joined her, his expression grim.
we're not alone.
The horror doesn't end on this page. Subscribe to turn the next terrifying chapter